Hi everyone, and welcome to MMX Baking Masterclass. I'm Marc Wautier, and today we're going to be learning how to make an amazing Tarte Tartin. Tarte Tartin is a classical French dessert. This is something that my mom used to make for lunch every Sunday when I lived in Paris, so it has really fond memories attached to it. I'm very excited to walk through with you this recipe that I learned from my mother. It's going to take about an hour to an hour and a half to make, and I would say it's an easy to medium recipe to make. So let's get started. So let's dive in, and we're going to be doing this in three parts. First, making the pie crust, and you can actually skip that step if you already have a pre-made pie crust that you want to use. The second step is going to be preparing the filling, and then the third step is assembling and baking. So for the pie crust, it's a very exciting step. I love making pie crusts. We have four very simple ingredients. Butter, I use European butter usually, or you can use American organic butter if you have to. All-purpose flour, kosher salt, and ice water. There's 90 grams of butter here, 180 grams of flour, just a pinch of the salt, and then a third of a cup of water. I'm using grams here, I apologize, I'm a French baker, but you can very easily go online and find conversions for cups and spoons if that's too much of a stretch. I love using this Cuisinart scale here for kitchen measurements, and good investment for any baker who wants to do something at home. Let's make a pie crust. This is a very versatile pie crust recipe. I actually recommend multiplying the proportions here by 3 or 5 so you can make multiple pie crusts at once, and then they keep really well in the freezer. It works for savory pies, it works for sweet pies, and it's a butter crust, which is the gold standard for French baking. So with that said, let's start. We have the flour in a bowl here. We'll add a pinch of salt, and we'll just really quickly whisk this together, just have the salt really blend with the flour a little bit. And then we'll just dump in our butter, which has been cubed, and we will start by hand, the traditional way, blending together the flour and the butter into kind of coarse grains. And at the end of this process, we should have a pretty uniform mixture that feels a little bit like a sandy butter and flour mixture. Cool, and so you can see when we're done here, this feels pretty coarse, and if you're packing it together, it should kind of clump together a little bit, just like this, and then fall apart pretty easily. When making pie crusts, it's really important to make sure that everything stays cool. You don't want your butter to start getting runny, and so I actually popped this one in the fridge for a few minutes before carrying on, and you can see this water is coming straight out of the freezer, just to make sure that the bowl is cool and everything is kind of ready to go. So we have this nice clumpy texture here, and what I'm going to do is just add the water here, cold water, and go back to kneading that dough a little bit. And it's going to take a little bit of time for the water to get absorbed, and the dough is actually going to feel kind of sticky for a while. And that's totally normal. Just stick to it, keep kneading it until all the water gets absorbed, and at the end you should have a nicely elastic dough that is going to be really nice to roll. So see, this is still a little bit wet here and kind of sticky, so I'm going to keep kneading it, kind of working it with my hands. You have to not be too scared of getting your hands dirty here. And this is just flour and butter, so nothing to be afraid of. You can roll it in your hands, stretch it a little bit, fold it on itself, and keep doing it really until it feels good, until it feels like it's not sticking to your hands as much anymore and kind of just feeling a little bit smoother. So I'm gonna keep doing that for a little bit. So as you can see, after rolling for a while, my hands don't have as much dough sticking to them anymore. This dough looks a lot more elastic, a lot smoother, and so it's a sign that it's getting ready. So what I'm going to do is just wrap it in saran wrap or a Ziploc bag, and then put it in the fridge just to cool down a little bit, so it's going to be easier to roll later on. So now that the dough is ready, you can tell that it's nice and smooth, elastic. This is great. We're going to keep this in the fridge actually, again, to keep the butter cool. Make sure that it's not too runny when we're going to try and roll it. So I'm just putting it in a Ziploc bag here, making sure it's nice and airtight, and then flattening it a little bit, and then putting that in the fridge. Wonderful. Our pie crust is now in the fridge, cooling down, which is great. It's a wonderful time to now start part 2, which is making the filling. Good idea to start off your oven right now, since we'll need it later, 390 Fahrenheit, so you can go and fire that up. And then in terms of utensils, I usually prepare my tarte tatin in a cast iron pan, which is going to be the easiest way to put it all together and assemble it later. But don't worry if you don't have one. You can also prepare the caramel in a regular saucepan, then pour the caramel in your pie mold, and then put the apples on top of the caramel. And I'll go over that again once we get to that point in the recipe. For the filling specifically, we'll need about 10 apples. Fuji, Honeycrisp are really good options. And you can see here I have a handful extra apples just in case I run short. Always a good idea to have a couple extra there so that you don't end up needing something that you don't have in your kitchen. 150 grams of butter, and then 150 grams of sugar. So let's get started. So I'm going to show you how to prepare the apples. We have 12 of these, so it can take a little bit of time. But just two really useful utensils to have, a quick peeler and then a paring knife. And obviously using a nice chopping board is going to be always super useful. So the way I do it is I can just go around and kind of peel the apple. Doesn't have to be super elegant. Start with the sides and then do top and bottom. And then once I'm done with that, what I'll do is just cut it in half with my paring knife. And the good news here is we don't need to cut it in cubes or anything. All we need is apple halves. So I'll just get it done here and then hollow out. If you have an apple core, you can also use that. It's really quick. I happen to not have an apple core, so I just go with my paring knife usually. It takes a few more minutes, but it's not too bad. So this is it. We want basically all of our apples to look like this at the end of the process. Okay, nice. So we have all of our apples cut and ready. We can just put them in some lemon water in the fridge to kind of keep their nice color. Doesn't matter that much because they're going to go and cook in caramel. But if you want to make sure that they don't kind of lose their color, you can do that while we make our caramel. So let's make that happen. Awesome. So our oven's preheating. Cast iron is on medium-high heat. Always good to wait for it to get a little bit warm before we add anything. And we're going to start making our caramel. It's a great butter caramel, really delicious. And like I said before, if you don't have a cast iron, don't want to make this recipe with a cast iron, you can prepare the caramel in any kind of saucepan. So we're going to start by putting the butter in the pan and melting it down. And then we're going to add the sugar in there. And we can dissolve our sugar in the butter. So you want to keep stirring pretty regularly to make sure that you get that right combination of the sugar in the butter. And then while it caramelizes, you also want to make sure that you keep stirring a little bit so that your caramel doesn't burn. It's definitely a step that requires a little bit of attention. You want it to just start browning, but not get too brown, because even after you turn the stove off, it's going to continue browning a little bit because the pan is going to be so hot. So you definitely want to keep an eye on it and make sure that it doesn't get too far. So this is really nice here. You can see we're already seeing some of that white froth start to appear. So it's showing that our sugar is caramelizing nicely. So we're gonna keep looking at this for a little bit while it browns. Okay, so the caramel is browning nicely here, and you can see already we're starting to see some liquid butter separate from the caramel, which is totally normal, so no reason to freak out. And here I'm gonna stop my stove here because I am getting that nice brown color, and I know it's going to keep browning a little bit even after I turn it off, so this is really nice. And at this point, if you are making the caramel in a saucepan, it's a good time to transfer it to just a regular pie pan, just like this. And so you would just pour it in there, and then you can do the next steps directly in the pie pan. But since we're doing this on this cast iron here, you just keep stirring a little bit, making sure that the caramel doesn't get too burned at the bottom. So you can gorgeous, really nice brown color here. And we're going to move on to the next step, which is adding the apples and cooking them a little bit in the caramel before popping it all in the oven. So with the apples, we have all these halves, and what we're going to be doing is fanning out these halves directly in the cast iron pan like this. And so you will need to kind of keep holding onto them a little bit to maintain the shape of this fan, which can be a little bit tricky. And you can hear that they're starting to cook a little bit in the caramel here, which is great. That's what we want to happen. Easy. And then we'll keep putting these inside as well. And you can pick kind of the size that goes well. And then rearrange a little bit. It's like dominoes. Okay, pro tip here is if you have a few apple halves left, then what you can do is just chop them in smaller cubes and then fill in the holes in your pie, just to again make sure that we have a nice full filling of apple. Okay, and once we're done with these apples, we'll turn the heat back on high heat for about 10 minutes to cook the apples in the caramel a little bit so that we don't have to leave them in the oven as long. So like I said, our filling just had 10 minutes on the stove on high heat to kind of go and bake the apples a little bit. It's looking gorgeous. We left it up on the stove, no worries there. And what I did is I took our pie crust out of the fridge. It's nice and cool, and I brought it in on my marble slab, but really any flat surface works. You can just do this on your counter if you want. Rolling pin and some flour. So what I'm going to do is flour up my surface a little bit and make sure that it's nice and spread out. Do the same thing with my rolling pin. And then I'm going to just grab the pie dough and just tap it down a little bit. And then the way I do this is I kind of start rolling it top, down, left, right, and then sideways. And kind of just try and keep it with a nice circular shape. And really all you want is to get it to be about the size of your cast iron pan or pie pan, plus a few inches on the side to kind of make sure that it tucks in right. But it doesn't have to be a perfect circle. It doesn't have to be, you know, a specific thickness. Like with the amount of dough that we made, you should have enough to cover a 9-inch pan or cast iron. So really you should have plenty of dough here, and it's always a good idea to flip it in the middle just to make sure it doesn't stick too much to your surface. Make sure to add some flour at the bottom here, make sure that it's nicely spread, and then kind of give it a few more rolls. And since we're developing the gluten here, it might bounce back a little bit as you roll it, so it might just shrink a little bit as you turn it. And again, that's fine, just like roll it back a little bit more and give it that shape. Cool, so it's looking not too bad here, looking like we have the right size. So we're going to put the rolling pin here, wrap it on top is going to help us to transport it more easily, and we're going to take it to our cast iron pan. So what I'm doing here is just laying it on top, and again, if you have a pie pan that you're using, you're doing the exact same thing, just laying it on top, and you want to make sure that it's covering the entire pan and sticking out a little bit on the sides. This is great, this is the exact right size we want. And then what you're going to do is, whatever is hanging out, you're going to just tuck in and go around like this. And this is where it doesn't really matter if it's an exact round shape, because you just end up tucking it in anyway. And hopefully you just have enough dough here hanging that once it's tucked in, you can just push it down the sides and make sure that it kind of goes in as far as possible, and you can just push the apples inward a little bit if that helps. But what we want to make sure here is that we have a good amount of dough on the sides that's going to keep the caramel in and have it infuse the dough instead of bubbling kind of out of the pan. And you have to keep in mind that at the very end of this process, after it's baked, we're going to flip it. And so this is going to be the bottom of the pie. And so the more you push your crust to the side, the more you have a nice side to your pie here. So this is looking decent enough. So like I said, it doesn't have to be too polished here, and you just want to cut a bit of a hole in the middle here just to vent all the steam that's going to come out as we put this in the oven. So don't forget that step, otherwise it's going to kind of inflate and push your dough up. You don't want to do that. This is still very hot, so I'm going to add a plate here, and we're going to pop this in the oven, which now should be nice and warm. I usually use the middle rack, doesn't really matter too much. And I do put a bit of a aluminum foil sheet beneath, just in case the caramel does bubble over the pan and kind of drips at the bottom of your oven. That way you don't have to clean the caramel mess at the very end. So this is all good. We're going to set a timer for about 30 minutes, but really what we want to do is just keep an eye on it and just keep it in the oven until the crust is nice and golden, and that's going to tell us that it's ready. Okay, so we're about 20 minutes in, so let's check it out. This is great. We're having a lot of bubbling. Our dough is starting to crust up a little bit. You can tell that I did get a little bit of caramel dripping, so I'm glad that I have this sheet of foil here, but it's looking like it's in a really good shape. So we're gonna wait another 10 minutes and see if we're good. Okay, so it sounds like we're all done. Let's check it. Yes, amazing. We have a nice golden crust, and as you can see here, our caramel has really nicely come and cooked everything here. So we're gonna let it rest just for a few minutes, give the caramel a little bit of time to stop bubbling, and then what we're going to do is flip it onto this plate. Okay, so we're getting close to the end of this first MMX Baking Masterclass. We made a crust, or bought one in the store if you wanted to go a bit faster. We made our filling with the caramel, the apples, we covered it with the crust, kept it in the oven for 30 minutes. We have a beautiful golden crust here, and now we're going to be flipping it. So this is the moment of truth. It does require a little bit of physical reflexes, but don't worry if somehow the flip doesn't work out for you. It's fine. It's still going to be delicious. You can piece it back up together and eat it with a spoon. That's totally fine. And the reason I'm saying this is I have no idea how this is going to turn out. So now take a plate that's at least as big as your pan. This one is nice. It kind of covers exactly. And I'm gonna grab by the handle. This is where it's nice to use a cast iron pan. But again, if you're using a pie pan with handles, you just grab it by the handles. And then we're going to raise it a little bit, and in one smooth movement, flip it. Just like that. And it's normal for some caramel to drip. There's a lot of liquid caramel here. So what you want to do is set it on the surface first, and then raise. And here you go, you have your Tarte Tartin. And for aesthetic purposes, you might want to shift back any apples that might have steered out of the way during the flipping process, just to make sure that it's nice and evenly distributed. And let it cool down a little bit. As it cools, the caramel will solidify a little bit more, and so a lot of that liquid you're seeing is going to get either absorbed directly in the crust or just solidify itself within the apple. So always good to let it cool a few minutes more. It's best served slightly warm, not too cold, and you can always pair it with a little bit of vanilla ice cream or whipped cream if you want, but I shouldn't be saying that because the French are pretty purists about their Tarte Tartin, and you're really supposed to eat it plain. So really looking forward to eating this. I'm going to wait about 10 minutes to make sure it's just the right temperature and then dive into it. It was a really fun experience walking you through this first dessert together. I'm really excited for what's coming next. We'll have the chocolate mousse next, and that one is an easy dessert to make to impress your friends if you have them over for dinner when there's no pandemic. But again, thank you so much for joining us today, and I hope you enjoyed this dessert that my family likes so much. Thank you.